Welcome to the Edinburgh Fringe. If we've been doing this forever, why keep coming back? Let's ask Guy Masterson. Yes, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. This is Edinburgh calling. Ewan Spence here. And it is July, but the Fringe show is very much underway and working. That's why we had last week's episode, our little prologue, our introduction, and also the sort of technical test that all the feeds are working. We're showing up in all the apps and the directories, and there was no issues this year. We didn't have to revive the show in any directory, so all is good. So, it's our first full preview show. These are going to happen every week now up until the Fringe proper. And it is still guest interviews, but we'll be taking just a little bit of a wider look at parts of the Fringe, be it the writing, the directing, the decisions and the impacts. So, there's a lot of the Fringe. And as always, we'll just try and get just a little bit of it throughout the month of August. And we'll try and get a little bit in every show as well. Our first guest this year is Guy Masterson. This will be his 33rd Fringe. So when we're looking at what does it mean to be at Fringe, there's a lot of experience and a wealth of knowledge on here. He's working on 5 shows at the Fringe this year: the Tao of Lloyd, Ludwig Unfinished Business, 11.5 Angry Men, Call Me Elizabeth, and Scaramouche Jones. We will have, as always, links into the Edinburgh Fringe box office back at our website for all those shows, edinburghfringe.thepodcastcorner.com. They're also doing some previews at London and Bedford Fringe of a few of those shows. We will have the links there. So if you're not coming up to Edinburgh and you're in that area, you got a chance to get some Fringe before the Fringe, much like these previews. As well as talking about those shows, including the 11.5 Angry Men show, which may well be one of the big shows that comes out of the Edinburgh. We also get a chance to talk about the importance of live theatre, why there is so much risk in the world of arts, and yes, why has he come back to the Fringe after saying never again? You know, before starting this interview, Guy, you and I had to compare notes and just try and work out how many Fringes, how many shows, how many times we've met. It is a ridiculously big number that I'm embarrassed to mention. We've been doing this since God were a boy.
It's over 50 years between us.
21 for me, 32 for you. Yes, it will be 50. Yet in all that time we've talked, we've discussed the shows, but I don't ever think we've managed to actually do a proper one-to-one talking about you, your life, Fringe and theatre and everything else in the world.
God, there's a lot to talk about. Particularly now.
Yes. Well, of course, you and I have been around this game long enough to know that you're doing this as a PR opportunity. So let's get that out the way first, shall we?
Yeah,
what are you doing at the Fringe this year?
Well, since you ask.
I mean, just as an aside.
Just an aside. At 12:25, I'll be giving the Tao of Lloyd, a brilliant live podcast event where it's a live meditation, very, very funny, caustic satire humor on the state of the world and America in particular. And then at 12:35, Ludwig Unfinished Business, which is the inside story on Ludwig van Beethoven, where he tries to put the record straight while struggling to write his final symphony. And he tells us he's Mike Hatchard is a brilliant pianist of all creeds and colors, jazz, pop, classic. He can play anything. And he also looks like Beethoven. It's very, very funny. And then at 2:30 at the EICC, we've got the big one, which is called 11.5 Angry Men, which is a parody of the great production, he says modestly, in 2003 of 12 Angry Men, which I famously did with 12 stand-up comics, including Bill Bailey and Phil Nickel and all of that lot. And we tried to get the rights to do a 20th anniversary edition of it in 2023, but we were denied the rights. So Owen O'Neill wrote the parody. And it's taken 5 years to get here, but here we are. A cast of brilliant comedians: Stephen K. Amos, Joe Pasquale doing his Edinburgh debut, Phil Nichol, I could list them all, Spencer Jones, Glenn Wool, J.J. Whitehead, Stephen K. Amos. It's just a fantastic company. David Calvito, Owen O'Neill, of course. And we're very, very excited. A parody, very hilarious, based on the original. But it's one with a very strong reason for doing it, which we can come back to. And then at 4:10, I think it is, no, not 4:10, 3:30, is Call Me Elizabeth, which is an audience with Elizabeth Taylor, a life in two parts, which is on odd days you've got from Lassie to Cleopatra. Elizabeth tells us about those early days in Hollywood and becoming a superstar. And then the second part on even days is From Burton to Humanitarian, where she talks about that incredible relationship she had with Richard Burton and the passion, and then eventually the tangential turn into activism, humanitarianism, with her fight for AIDS and recognition of the HIV problem and forcing Ronald Reagan's hand. And at 4:10, the great Justin Butcher brings back his tour de force, globally acclaimed Scaramouche Jones, which has actually been done several times at the Fringe, but this year is the 25th anniversary of it. So, and so we're going to make a splash, and we're going to do it in a big tent, which is the way where it should have been done in the first place. And we can't wait to bring that back. It's really something which you should see once in your life. It's a remarkable performance, a remarkable story.
I mean, when you get a wall of shows like that, I get to have so many questions, and I know that it is going to be like which path do I go down? Where do we go? I know where I'm going to start, actually, because you've been doing this Fringe for so many years, and one of the things that sometimes casual observers see about the Fringe as a whole is them always sort of grabbing onto popular properties and parodies. So, for example, this year, I know there's going to be lots of shows about heated rivals or heated rivalry or whatever it is. And there's so many parodies of big things that just sort of, well, we don't have the rights to that, but we can go very close to it. And you're doing the same this year as well with 11 and a half.
We are.
I find that approach intriguing.
Well, it was interesting. The reason why, when Owen and I decided to do the parody, it's because 12 Angry Men is an incredibly popular title now. It wasn't when we first did it. It was the rights were being controlled by this big company in America, the Roundabout Theatre Company. And they gave us dispensation to do Edinburgh. And of course, the show was so huge that we were being invited all around the world. And of course, they got cold feet. They didn't want us to have the rights to do it in London, so they blocked us. We did it in Australia, and we still hold the box office record for touring theatre in Australia, which is incredible. Won loads of awards, but then couldn't do it anywhere else. I was offered, I think, Alaska. I was offered Nova Scotia, India, but I couldn't get the comedians to go there. But anyway, so we decided to do the parody, and I said to Owen, it's all very well doing a parody, but we can't just make it for laughs. There's got to be a central core to it, the reason for parodying it, and making a point. Good parodies make a point. Great comedy makes a point. Often political, often just pure satirical, but this one has a very strong core to it. And so yes, it's populated by very funny people. It will not be done in a funny way. It'll be done dead serious, dead straight, but by proxy, hilarious, because it's taken dead seriously. And actually, the core of it is serious. What do you do with a predominantly white male jury that's deciding the fate of a young boy? And actually, all they want is to get home and go to the ball game. Let's get this over and done with, which is very similar to the original. So it does say a lot about white male power and patriarchy.
How proud does it make you feel that you can showcase that sort of political drive at a festival like this?
Well, it's not the politics that we're showcasing. We're actually showcasing a brilliant piece of writing that happens to showcase that too. Because I don't want people coming to think they just see pure entertainment. There is a strong reason for it, and I've always, that's what my theatre always has. There's got to be a better reason than pure entertainment. I think that's probably why I never went with musicals. When I did actually direct a musical. I co-directed The Marvelous Elephant Man, which was in itself an incredible political statement down in Australia, and we were hoping to bring that to the West End. It may well make it, but it's edgy and it's dangerous, and it's really pushing the boundaries of political correctness to make a point. And but it does, and it won, the Best Theatre Award in Adelaide. It was about 3 years ago, for a reason. It wasn't just an entertainment based on the film. How can you make a movie about the Elephant Man? Isn't that exploitation? No, it's not. It's actually making a very strong point. So all my theatre, at least all the theatre I find myself attracted to, is making a point. I also don't like to produce work that is purely about showcasing the talent of the performer. I'm quite happy to showcase the talent of a performer if there's a reason for the work that they're doing. And when Ian Shaw came to me with his idea about his dad, The Shark is Broken, a few years ago, I was fascinated by his reason why, apart from his personal reasons, to tell the truth about what happened on that boat when they were filming it, but also about a man struggling with alcoholism. And, and it became a play about three fathers, not just his father, but three fathers, and their fathers' fathers. Much, much deeper play than just a piece about the most popular film in the world, and that's why it went to the West End. That's why it went to Broadway. If it had just been an entertainment, it would have probably lasted a few weeks and have been a lot of fun for the people who've seen it. But it was far more than that. And it was wrapped up in this populist bow of Jaws, and it was a smorgasbord for Jaws fans. And I always said, this is a smorgasbord for Jaws fans. They're going to love it, but they're going to get something they didn't expect. And because they got that, they absolutely adore it.
Do you think that sort of emotional connection, bringing people in and then delivering more, is that what you're expecting from the Elizabeth Taylor show this year?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, that was a very personal thing because, she was my aunt, just dropped that in, great aunt technically. And I'm very protective of the way people talk about her, probably as a throwback to the way I was very protective about the way they talked about my uncle, Richard, because I'm actually blood related to Richard. He was my grandmother's second youngest brother by 20 years. So he grew up with my mother and as brother and sister. I got to know the real person. I spent 5 weeks with him when I was 19, driving him to Switzerland. So had a very personal experience with him. And he talked about Elizabeth. And so after he talked about Elizabeth, she was no longer my famous auntie, who he was no longer married to, was much closer to her. So when I saw there was a play about Elizabeth in Edinburgh in 2023, I'd just come back from Broadway, opening The Shark is Broken, and I happened to see this poster of Elizabeth Taylor, looking like Elizabeth Taylor, and I thought, wow, who's got the balls to play that? And I went to see it, and I thought she was fantastic. But she'd only done the period from Lassie to Cleopatra, from Child Star to the moment she met Richard. And I thought, well, there must be more to this. So we met after the show. And not only was I utterly enchanted by her, apart from the fact she's as beautiful as Elizabeth Taylor, she's an absolute charmer and a brilliant performer. And I said, so what's your intention with the rest of her life? And she said, well, I haven't finished writing it. And I leapt in there and I said, well, I would love to help you with that. because I might be able to give you some insights into the personal side of the story. Mercifully, I was able to give her something that she didn't know about, and I was able to help her bring that to fruition in the dramaturgy of the play.
This is Kayla Boy.
Yeah. And so I was very excited about putting it on in Edinburgh, but the full story. But we can't, Edinburgh's only hour-long shows now. I'm lucky to get 80 minutes for 11 and a half Angry Men, and I'm very lucky to get 90 minutes for Scaramouche Jones. But every other show in Edinburgh has to be an hour, right? So I decided to put the show on over 2 days. So you can see from Lassie to Cleopatra on odd number days, and you can see from Burton to Humanitarian on even number days. And both have their merits. And one is about a child star who rises to become, the Cleopatra, the world's greatest star, the first $1 million actress, in rivalry with Marilyn Monroe at the time, but widely regarded as the world's greatest actress, because Marilyn wasn't regarded as the world's greatest actress, which was much to her chagrin. Elizabeth was the Meryl Streep of the day, and here she was. So that's a remarkable story in itself. How she negotiated the studio systems, how she got to where she was, and it wasn't by lying down. I can tell you that. It was by standing up to Daryl Zanuck and knowing her power and standing. And that's the thing about Elizabeth, which I don't think a lot of people knew, how strong she was and how witty she was and how brilliant she was at seeing through people and how not allowing herself to be taken advantage of.
I mean, she's at the tail end of the studio system while she's...
No, she was right in the heart of the studio system, yeah.
Which is when actors were contracted to a studio and you were essentially told what to do.
Yeah, she was contracted to 20th Century Fox, yeah, and B. Meyer, and it was pretty brutal, I can tell you that. But she stood up to him, and she didn't have to do what Marilyn did. So her love life was littered with heartbreak and tragedy. And when you think that she was living at the top of the Hollywood system and protected and then suddenly she had this fairy tale marriage to Nicky Hilton, which broke up soon after, and no one can tell the reasons why. And the powers that be don't want any scandal because she's a very highly controlled movie star. And all she wants to do is say, ladies, watch out. This is what happens. I'm not going to give any more away about it there. But and then she bounces to Michael Wilding, who was a British charming gentleman, but they didn't have much chemistry, and that didn't last long. And then she fell in love with Michael Todd, head over heels in love with this great showman, and he dies in a plane crash, and then and on a plane that she was supposed to be on. But she wasn't feeling well, so she didn't go on the trip, and he dies. Plane crashes. And then she's comforted by Eddie Fisher, who's married to Debbie Reynolds, who's America's sweetheart, and he falls in love with her, and because she refuses to have a relationship with someone she's not married to, he divorces Debbie Reynolds, and so she's now known as a heartbreaker, a family breaker. This is the great Elizabeth Taylor, and she says, "Wait a minute, I didn't leave her; he did." And so and then of course that breaks up when she meets Richard Burton and falls absolutely head. They can't help themselves, and this is the affair of the century, and in full view of the cameras. And then 20th Century Fox use her and him to sell their film, which, because the film is going to break the studios unless they have something. You've got Mark Antony going out with Cleopatra. You couldn't get a better publicity stint than that. So they throw them to the wolves. And by proxy, they become Liz and Dick. They become on every front page, everywhere. Everyone wants to know about it. They become the megastars, the first megastars. The word paparazzi was invented for them. So then, and then you've got Elizabeth talking about the passion of her life, Richard, and how that took them to heaven and it threw them down into hell. And that burned out as almost as quickly as it started, 12 years. And they couldn't have children together, so they adopted. And And then they had to deal with the fallout for the rest of their lives. And for Richard, it was, the constant battle with alcoholism and eventual early death. And for Elizabeth, it was breakdown, reevaluation, getting off the drugs, Betty Ford Center. And eventually she had a reckoning and became a humanitarian because her three best friends were all gay. And the gay scourge was, or the gay disease, what it was called at the time, she was saying, enough is enough. Who was it? Rock Hudson, Montgomery Clift, and James Dean, all gay, and no one could talk about it. So that was a momentous moment in life. So if you want to hear Elizabeth Taylor talk in her own words about her extraordinary life, that's where you come. And I'm so proud to do that. And of course, I ran the script by my cousin Liza and family, and they said, "My God, you're telling the story. This is fantastic." Full backing.
Is it easier or harder to approach this show having the familial connection?
Well, my job as director is to give the audience something which they're not expecting. We're not just doing a bio play where we're just rehashing a Wikipedia story or historians' interpretations. We're saying, what if he did? What if he was in front of you? What if they, or she? What would they say about these events in their lives, and how do they square those events in their lives with their personalities? If much as you might hate the legacy of Adolf Hitler, isn't it fascinating to be in a room with him and to hear him try to justify his warped utopias? And yes, it obviously was, because that's one of the biggest selling solo shows of all time. I did the same with Hermann Goering. Hermann Goering was famously conflicted because he had a Jewish godfather who he loved, and his brother, I forget his name, the other Goering, was constantly using his connection to Hermann Goering to free Jews from concentration camps, which was a bane in Hermann's life, and getting them over the border to Switzerland, and he had nothing personal against Jewish people, but he was the Reich Marshal of the German Reich, and he was charged with enacting the final solution. I mean, how can you be more conflicted with that?
It sounds to me that you wholeheartedly believe that theatre is holding up a mirror to life.
Oh my God! There's one magic ingredient that theatre has that film doesn't. It's two-dimensional. Theatre is three-dimensional, four-dimensional, because you're in touch with the spirit of the person on stage. And if they get it right, your imagination takes over and you believe that that person is that person. For all intents and purposes, they're talking in the first person. They're talking from their soul as to why they did and said, and even if they're talking lies or they're trying to cover up a moment, it's the subtext which gives you the truth. And if that's directed well, the audience will make their decision. I've just done one about Picasso with Peter Tate. We brought it in 2023. It's called Picasso Le Monstre Sacré, because he was called the sacred monster. Why? Because he was a sacred monster. My God, the way he dealt with the women in his life was monstrous, and he justified it by saying, "I'm the greatest artist in the world. I must have my muses. And when I don't have the muse, or if the muse is gone, I need to move on." Now, who else could talk about women that way? I know a few names out there, but Picasso was forgiven because he's Picasso. So how do we justify that? So we put Picasso there justifying himself. How does that make you feel when he tells the story from inside out? How does it make you feel when he says, "What could I do? I had to paint. That was why I was put on this earth." And yes, we agree with him. You had to paint. But why did you have to treat the women in your life this way? Very often people who get to that stage are, have huge narcissistic streaks. They might be ADHD. They might be autistic. Whatever made them the people they are, there's always reasons for them to become there. It's not just a pure black and white power thing, or the wish to get rich, or the wish to screw someone over, or the wish to, there's always a reason. People they're not born monsters. Well, some might be, but very, very few. Hitler could justify everything he did in his heart. It was warped, and not a lot of people agree with him. Well, actually, a lot of people did agree with him for a long, long time. And there are still people who agree with his warped utopias. But it's an interesting thing to be on the stage or in the room with that person, and that's what my theatre is for.
So do you think you were put on this earth to be a theatre director?
Oh, God. I think anybody using the words put on this earth, it's. I hate it when I hear it, put it this way. I was put on this earth to be an actor.
Okay, let me change it slightly then. Would others think you've been put on this earth to be a theatre director?
Christ, I don't know. To be a theatre person that happens to love directing, that happens to only work on things which really, really get me, and I feel need to be there, and that I'm prepared to take every risk to get it there. Maybe they might think that, but there again, my work is in solo work says the same stuff, and the work that I champion that I can't necessarily be involved with artistically, like for example, Call Me Elizabeth. I'm not the director of that. I helped her shape it. I advised on it, but that's good enough for me when it comes to Elizabeth. I'm not going to go in and say I know better than you. I must take over this play. But I do have a track record of making things work, and I think my approach is, I like to think my approach is from an honest place. And I have very strong views about what acting is and what drama is for, or what theatre is for, or can be used for. And I can, because I'm a sole trader, I can stick to my ideals. No one's going to tell me what to do.
Rather than give advice to your younger self, what do you think your younger self would advise you to do now?
Probably take less risks and just enjoy the rest of my life. But I mean, 2 years ago, I famously announced I would never come back to Edinburgh.
I was going to avoid that one, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I'm quite happy to admit it, because it's the very reasons I've talked to you about already that made me come back this year. All of the shows that I'm doing, I'm not looking for an excuse. I'm not doing this like a big boxer would because I've run out of money and I need to get back on in the boxing ring. I'm doing it because I had 4 projects that had to be done, which I'd already started before I announced that. And then one which had to be done the moment it was told to me. So I ended up with 5. And there would have been another one. And again, for the right reasons, but they couldn't make it work. It was a piece about Palestine, which I wanted to do. And I don't have the money to do this. So I borrowed it, which is insane. And if you want to know and neither do the comedians who are coming up to do 11 and a half Angry Men. They're all doing it on spec. They're paying for their own accommodation. They're paying themselves all their expenses. They're paying the expenses themselves. I'm not paying them a thing to be in it. If this thing breaks even, every penny is shared equally between us. And it's got every chance of breaking even because it's a great cast. It's a great idea. It's in a big theatre. So, if we do sell the way that 12 Angry Men sold, then they get paid something. It's not a whole lot, but they're doing it for free. They're doing it because they want to be part of it. And I guess if I'm not going to do these projects, I don't know who would, because I think people do it for different reasons to me. Very often it comes down to, do I have the money? Well, in terms of financing this, yes, the whole season's costing me about, I should say it's costing about 80,000. None of which I have personally in my bank account. So I've asked for it. I borrowed it. How can I borrow £80,000 and expect to get it back at the Fringe? Yeah, that's a big question. I'm relying on 30 years of experience, 30 years of reputation, 30 years of building an audience, 30 years of trust with that audience, where the basic costs of what I'm doing might just get covered. If we get the critical acclaim that I believe these shows will get, then we might get it. We might break even. If we don't break even, we're not going to lose the whole 80,000. Let's be fair. That would be a catastrophe. But, I will probably go go home with a debt, which I will make up for by doing a Christmas carol over Christmas time. That's how I do it. I take ridiculous risks. God help me. At least I'm not remortgaging my house.
As I always like to say, if you're in the entertainment or the arts, risk is our business. Because that's
it is, but nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Yeah.
Look, even when you're a writer and you've got the idea, how do you get it from here onto the page? That's a risk. It's a risk. Because you're going to spend God knows how long writing it, and then no one likes it. No one wants to produce it. No one, Or is it a risk, or do you just have to do it? I like to think that true art is that you don't get a choice. You have to do it.
And that's what we have at the Fringe. Thousands of risks, thousands of shows. People who come up to put on shows like yourself, going to watch other shows, this massive melting point of humanity. And that question of why do we keep coming back to this? I think the answer is somewhere in there.
Well, that is a question which people always ask. And as I said, 2 years ago, I announced famously my retirement because I was fighting with this idea. It was post-COVID. There wasn't much money floating around. I was really angry with this money that was given to the Fringe, but not shared with the artists. I've calmed down a bit since then, realizing that how else could it have been shared? There are some bursaries out there, but ultimately, and I always say this, people forget that the entire circus is funded by the artists. And, I've got friends who are venue managers, William Beddock Coots, Anthony Alderson, and they would argue, we have a risk too. But actually, the 40% of the box office is going to pay for that risk. The people who go away with the losses generally are the artists. They would argue, the 40% doesn't cover it, or the rent that we charge doesn't cover it. I would argue that it covers a lot more than our risk. We actually have to cover your risk and our risk. So, that might sound like a contentious statement, and I'm not belittling their risk, but yes, ultimately, this festival would not happen without the shows, without the artists that created those shows and the risks that they take. It wouldn't. And I think most people in their hearts know that.
So the 5 shows that have your name attached, as I said, we will have links back to those, but they go through previews as well, and not everybody is in Edinburgh, so some other people are going to get the chance to see these as well.
Yes, I have a 2-week preview season at the Playground Theatre in London, which is in Kensington, and we've got 2 previews of 11.5 Angry Men, the first time anybody will ever see that live. That's at the end of July. We've got previews of The Tao of Lloyd and Ludwig Unfinished Business. We have previews of Mike McShane's The Event, which is happening at the Gilded Balloon in Edinburgh. And we've got all those comedians that are in 11.5 Angry Men doing 2 of their comedy stints per night for the 2 weeks leading up to the Fringe, ending with a comedy gala on the 31st of July, where you can see all of those guys on stage doing 10 minutes of their best work. You couldn't miss it.
And then they all pile onto a train or a plane or an automobile or a unicycle.
A van or a canoe. And I've also got 2 previews of Ludwig and the Tao of Lloyd at the Bed Fringe on the 24th and 26th of July at Bedford Fringe.
And we will have all of those links on your website, which we will, as I said, there, get back on our website. Guy, we'll probably bump into each other at some point in August, but it has been a delight and a pleasure just to scrape the surface of what it means to be theatre.
Pleasure. See you there.
Guy Masterson there, and a small venue's worth of shows to choose from. Links to the Edinburgh Fringe box office for Tao of Lloyd, Ludwig Unfinished Business, 11.5 Angry Men, Call Me Elizabeth, and Scaramouche Jones at edinburghfringe.thepodcastcorner.com. Previews, Playground Theatre London for 11.5 Angry Men will also be linked, as will to the Bedford Fringe, where you've got previews of Ludwig Unfinished Business and the Tao of Lloyd going on. Oh, right, okay. Link, like, love, share, subscribe. All of the usuals. If you're looking at us in a directory or an app that allows a star rating, please consider giving us one as well. It lifts us a little bit up in the search engines. It helps more people discover the show. And it's always nice to have feedback online. Another preview next week as we get closer to the Fringe. When we do get to the Fringe, we'll be switching over to daily shows, bringing you the people who are behind the shows, the options to see, and some of the great moments of the Fringe. We can't get all 3,000 shows in, but we'll do our best to bring you the flavour of the Fringe for our 22nd season. Ta-ra for now. Listening to the Edinburgh Fringe Show, hosted by Ewan Spence, produced by Spence Media for the Podcast Corner. Listen to more from the Fringe at edinburghfringe.thepodcastcorner.com.